Hello and welcome to this Bench Report series on the UK Constitution. Not a written document, but a collection of sources evolving over centuries. Our second episode focuses on the UK Parliament.
Today we're looking at what makes up the UK Parliament and, crucially, what it actually does.
It's such a key part of how the UK is run, its power. Where does that originate?
Well, its legal basis comes from the royal prerogative. It's often referred to as the king or crown in Parliament.
And it makes laws for the whole UK.
It's the legislature for the UK on reserved matters, yes. And it can legislate on devolved matters too, but normally only with consent from the devolved legislatures.
Ah, okay. And the UK Parliament itself? That structure can't be devolved.
No, the UK Parliament is itself a reserved matter. Its existence and powers are set at the UK level.
Got it. What's its official title? It's quite long, isn't it?
It is. The Parliament of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That name dates back to the Royal and Parliamentary Titles Act, 1927.
And a new parliament starts when? After an election.
A new parliament begins after each general election. The one elected in July 2024, for instance, is the 59th Parliament.
So it's not one continuous body then. It effectively resets.
That's right. And each of these parliaments, these 5-year terms roughly, are broken down further.
Into sessions. I think I've heard that term.
Yes, into sessions. A session usually lasts about a year, though it can vary.
And who decides when they actually meet and take breaks?
The government sets the sitting calendar, the days they'll work. But the recess periods, the breaks, are agreed upon by both houses.
And they don't always have to meet physically anymore.
No, there's provision now for hybrid proceedings, so virtual participation is possible.
Interesting how things adapt. What about the actual buildings, the Palace of Westminster? Who controls that space?
It's divided. The Speaker of the House of Commons controls the Commons areas, and the Lord Speaker controls the Lords areas.
And Westminster Hall. That central bit.
That's slightly different. It's under the joint control of the Lord Great Chamberlain, who represents the King, and both the speakers.
Right. And that image everyone knows, the crowned gate symbol.
The crowned portcullis. Yes, that's the official emblem of the UK Parliament. Queen Elizabeth II formally authorized its use in 1997.
There's also a youth parliament, I believe.
There is, yes. The UK Youth Parliament, it's elected, been going since 1999. Its aim is really to give young people a voice and potentially influence the parliamentary process.
Good to get younger people engaged. Now, let's shift to powers. Parliamentary sovereignty. That's the big one, isn't it? What does it really mean in practice?
It's absolutely central. The classic definition comes from A.V. Dicey. He basically said it means Parliament has the right to make or unmake any law whatsoever.
And no person or body can override or set aside Parliament's legislation.
Traditionally, yes. That's the core idea. It's even recognized in statute now. Of course, there are ongoing debates about how this interacts with, say, international law or human rights commitments.
So fundamentally, Parliament is the supreme lawmaker.
That's the principle. And to help it function, there's something called parliamentary privilege.
Privilege? What does that involve?
It refers to the specific immunities, exemptions, rights, and powers that belong to each house and its members. They're needed for Parliament to do its job without interference.
What kind of rights are we talking about?
Well, perhaps the most famous is freedom of speech within Parliament. Article 9 of the Bill of Rights, 1689. And there's a similar provision in the Scottish Claim of Right, protects debates and proceedings in Parliament from being challenged in any court or place outside Parliament.
So MPs can speak freely inside the chamber without fear of being sued, for example.
Exactly. It's crucial for open and honest debate on potentially difficult issues.
Makes sense. Okay, what about ending a parliament? How does that happen? Elections, obviously, but...
Well, Parliament could vote to dissolve itself.
Yeah.
But the standard way is dissolution by the king through a royal proclamation. This is done on the advice of the Prime Minister.
Is there a specific law governing this now?
Yes, the Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act 2022 sets out the current framework.
And that's different from prorogation.
Very different. Prorogation is the formal end of a session, not the whole Parliament. It's also a prerogative act, done on the PM's advice.
But the PM has some responsibility there.
Yes, there's a recognized constitutional responsibility for the Prime Minister to consider Parliament's interests when advising prorogation. It shouldn't be used simply to avoid scrutiny, for instance.
So, dissolution leads to an election. Prorogation just pauses things until the next session starts.
Precisely. And the start of a new session is quite the event.
The state opening.
Yes, the king opens the new session in state. Part of that ceremony involves the delivery of the king's speech.
Which outlines the government's plans.
Exactly. It sets out the legislative agenda for the session ahead.
Seems very ceremonial.
Yeah.
Does Parliament have any sort of older powers that aren't used much? I seem to recall impeachment being mentioned historically.
It does have the power to impeach individuals, yes,
Yeah.
but it's very rare. The last time was, I believe, 1806, so highly unlikely to be used today.
And specific powers for the Commons, especially regarding money.
Absolutely. The House of Commons has primacy when it comes to financial matters. Bills, primarily dealing with taxation or public spending, must originate in the Commons.
That reflects the elected nature of the Commons, controlling the public purse.
Yeah, that's the principle. And this ties into another key function, scrutiny.
Holding the government to account. How does that work?
Through various mechanisms. Commons select committees are very important. They examine the work of specific government departments in detail.
And MPs asking questions.
Yes, parliamentary questions, both oral questions in the chamber and written ones. Plus, ministers make statements to Parliament, and there are numerous debates on government policy and actions.
Can Parliament actually punish the government if it feels obstructed?
It has the power to fine the government or individuals in contempt of Parliament. This might happen if, for example, information requested isn't provided without good reason.
So, real teeth behind the scrutiny. What happens if the two houses, Commons and Lords, can't agree on a bill? Does it just fail?
Not necessarily. The Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949 provide a mechanism. They allow certain public bills to become law even without the full consent of the House of Lords after a specific delay in process.
So the elected Commons can ultimately get its way.
In most cases, yes, for public bills, though not for extending the life of a parliament. And interestingly, the courts have shown they are willing to look at whether the procedures in the Parliament Acts have been followed correctly if an act is passed using them.
A kind of legislative override. Let's talk about the actual process of making these laws. Primary legislation.
Right. So primary legislation acts of Parliament are formally enacted by the King in Parliament. That includes the Sovereign, the Lords, and the Commons.
And there are some modern requirements. Human rights, for example.
Yes. For any UK bill introduced, the minister in charge must make a statement about its compatibility with the European Convention on Human Rights. ECHR compatibility is a key consideration.
And in the Commons, government bills get priority.
Generally, yes. Government business takes precedence in the House of Commons timetable.
Okay, walk us through the typical stages a bill goes through.
It's quite a journey. Typically, it starts with a first reading, which is just a formality, introducing the bill. Then comes the second reading, which is a debate on the general principles of the bill.
Then it gets looked at in detail.
Yes, the committee stage. This is where detailed line-by-line examination happens, often in a smaller public bill committee. After that, it comes back to the whole House for the report stage or consideration, where further amendments can be debated.
And finally,
The third reading, which is usually a final debate on the bill as amended, before it's passed by that House and moves to the other House to go through similar stages.
and sometimes they look at bills before this formal process.
Yes, there's an established practice of pre-legislative scrutiny, where draft bills are examined by parliamentary committees before they are formally introduced. It often helps iron out issues early on.
A lot of steps.
Yeah.
And the absolute final step.
Royal assent. The monarch's agreement is required for a bill to become an act of parliament, to become law. It's a formality nowadays, but constitutionally essential.
We focused on acts of parliament. But what about delegated legislation? Statutory instruments?
Yes, SIs.
Yeah.
They are a form of secondary or delegated legislation. The power to make them is granted by an act of Parliament, the Parent Act. The Statutory Instruments Act 1946 sets out the main framework.
And Parliament just lets these happen.
Oh no, there are procedures for laying SIs before Parliament. Depending on the Parent Act, they might need Parliament's active approval, the affirmative procedure, or they might become law unless Parliament objects within a certain time, the negative procedure. There are committees that scrutinize them too.
So, still some oversight there. Let's circle back to the Crown's role. We said Parliament exists because of the royal prerogative.
That's its ultimate legal foundation, yes.
Yeah.
And the phrase king in Parliament explicitly includes the sovereign as part of the legislature.
And royal assent is key.
Absolutely vital. No bill becomes law without it.
How else does the Crown interact or communicate with Parliament?
Through formal messages. For example, the Commons is summoned to hear the king's speech by an official acting on the king's pleasure, and certain types of financial proposals require a king's recommendation before they can be debated.
Are there rules about mentioning the king in debates?
Yes. There's a long-standing rule against using the sovereign's name or trying to invoke their influence to sway debate in Parliament. You also can't cast aspersions on the sovereign or the royal family directly. It helps maintain the monarch's political neutrality.
Keeps the crown above the political fray. Finally, how does the UK Parliament interact with the devolved governments in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland? Does it still have power over them?
Constitutionally, the UK Parliament retains the authority to legislate on any matter, whether devolved or reserved. It has ultimate sovereignty.
But does it just legislate on devolved issues whenever it wants?
No. There's a very important constitutional convention called the Sewell Convention. This states that the UK Parliament does not normally legislate on a devolved matter without the consent of the relevant devolved legislature.
So it's a political agreement, not a strict legal rule.
Exactly. The convention is recognized in statute, in the Scotland Act and Wales Act, but the laws explicitly state that this recognition doesn't make it legally binding. So Parliament usually seeks consent, but it isn't legally forced to.
And what about asking questions about devolved matters at Westminster?
Generally, MPs in the UK Parliament are restricted from tabling questions that relate solely to matters that are the responsibility of the devolved administrations, though, as always, there can be exceptions depending on the circumstances.
Fascinating interplay there. Well, that covered a lot of ground on the UK Parliament.
It's a complex institution, but hopefully that gives a clearer picture of its structure and core functions.
Thanks for listening. Next in our series, we look at the devolved governments across the UK. Hope you can join us. Take care.
Hello there, this is Tom, the producer of The Bench Report. Listener suggestions are vital to my mission of making politics more accessible and accountable. So, if you have an issue that's really important to you, personally or professionally, and want to know what those in power are doing about it, please get in touch via email or via our socials at Bench Report UK. I'll grab another coffee and start scanning those parliamentary archives.